So that our adversaries knew that we could hit back effectively and where we chose covertly. The principal objective of the cybersecurity strategy was to put the cybersphere front and centre in the consciousness of leaders in both government and business, to make it an issue for the CEO and not just the CIO, the CISO, or the Chief Technology Officer. I described the strategy at the time as a roadmap as to how we will keep Australia safe and competitive in an increasingly digital world. Now, the strategy put additional funds behind cyber research and innovation, including the data science wing of the CSIRO, Data 61, established the Australian Cyber Security Centre, and of course, AustCyber itself was also established through my government's National Innovation and Science Agenda. Now, the key point here is the strategy, the cybersecurity strategy, was a whole of economy strategy. Governments cannot do this alone. Technology-enabled threats, particularly those that transcend industries and borders, require an internationally coordinated response. We have to share information and be transparent where it's appropriate. And so it's heartening to see conferences like this one, where leaders from both industry and government can come together to discuss how to protect against growing global cybersecurity threats. Now, as WA AustCyber's recent economic modelling found, cyber attacks cost the WA economy alone $150 million annually, with 12% of small businesses experiencing a cyber event. And the cost of cyber attacks and failing to prevent them is only likely to get higher. According to the World Economic Forum, an estimated 70% of new value created in the economy over the next decade will be based on digitally enabled business models. And, really, we used to talk about the digital economy as though it was something different. The reality is the economy is digital. See, in Australia today, digital trade enables $43 billion of economic value. By 2030, that's estimated to increase more than 3 times to $192 billion. And thanks to the unprecedented disruption of COVID-19, which we are experiencing most acutely here in Sydney right now, businesses have had to quickly pivot online, with more Australians working remotely than ever, with the speed of transition for most of those organisations being 2 weeks or less at the beginning of lockdown last year. I mean, so many of the things that we have done in the last 18 months or so, had you predicted it a year before, you would have been regarded as being somewhere between crackers or highly ambitious. I mean, who would have imagined that so many people could work from home? But ubiquitous connectivity enables you to do that. And that shift in the way we worked has also been combined with a shift in purchasing behaviour, more online shopping and e-commerce. And while our increasingly digital economy offers great opportunity, it brings with it greater challenge, with increased scope to exploit poor user behaviour. That's what I call the warmware. It often lets us down, and poor website security. Attack software is cheap and easy to use. You don't need to be a skilled software engineer to configure an attack, and absolutely nothing is unhackable. Now, the IBM Intelligence Index report, released in June this year, just this month, found the past 12 months has seen a steep jump in malicious activity, and this audience would know that better than anyone. The top 3 types of attacks included ransomware, making up 23%, data theft, which has increased 160% since 2019, and server access attacks up 233% in the last 2 years. In the past 12 months, more than half of Australian businesses were hit by attacks on their computer systems, losing on average 4 days of productivity in attempts to get back online. And while 95% of Australian CEOs saw cyber risks as the top threat to business growth, which indicates a far greater awareness of cybersecurity at the board level than when I was PM, there is still much more that needs to be done. Indeed, research shows that only 51% of Australian businesses have a cyber resilience strategy in place, and only a quarter have ongoing cyber awareness training. Now, in a connected world, everyone has to work more closely together and understand the vulnerabilities of network systems and adopt a higher standard. Getting down to basic issues like passwords is important. I often ask CEOs, do you know who your system administrator is? And do you know whether anyone oversees them? Blank stares were the typical response. And as we are seeing increasingly, this isn't good enough. Now, the SolarWinds cyber attack reported last December was one of the largest in history, where Russian government hackers carried out a supply chain attack, allowing them to infiltrate the IT systems of many leading organisations, local, state, federal government agencies within the US, NATO, the European Parliament, the United Kingdom government, and several global companies. It took nearly 9 months before the attack was even detected. And I'll come back to this point later, but when we spend a lot of time thinking about prevention, detection is just as important. Closer to home in March this year, we saw in 1 week alone a cyber attack on Nine, disrupting its usual programming and operations, similar attack on Taylor's Wine. And in recent weeks, a cyber attack on the world's largest meat processor, JBS, resulted in a temporary shutdown at 47 sites across Australia and the payout of more than $14 million in ransom. Now, all of these cases and others like it reaffirm the need to be innovative and agile in dealing with the growing cybersecurity threat. Now, since leaving politics, I've returned to investing in Australian technology and especially cybersecurity. And I should note for this audience in particular that it was 26 years ago, 1995, that a company of ours that we co-founded and supported, FTR, won the WA Emerging Software Exporter of the Year award. So it's good to be back in Western Australia, albeit virtually. Now, one company we've invested in is Kasada. It's a great Australian innovation story. It's quite romantic, really. It was founded by Sam Crowther, who is still 25. In fact, I've made a resolution that while I'm comfortable with investing in companies whose founders are younger than my children, when it gets to the point that they're younger than my grandchildren, I will really start to reappraise whether I'm too old for this business. Possibly not. Anyway, Sam got his start in cybersecurity through the Australian Signals Directorate. And Kasada estimates over 50% of web traffic is likely to be malicious and automated in the coming year. In other words, bot attacks will become more prevalent. Now, attacks at scale obviously have to be automated. There's a limit to how big your, Macedonian troll farm can be. But they're likely to wreak havoc through data and credential theft, particularly for the companies that are unprepared. In fact, Kasada's analysis that shows that over 90% of Australia's top 250 websites failed to prevent an automation tool from submitting credentials. So what Sam Crowther's company, Kasada, does then is present a series of obstacles to frustrate and disrupt the operating model of bot attacks, preventing hackers from using automation and challenging critical aspects of the attack process. In other words, in effect, setting them challenges. And that forces the attack to permanently cease as its return on investment inevitably collapses. It's no longer worth the time and money, and they move on to somebody else. So not only does Kasada neutralise the attack long term, but it prevents the bot operator from quickly retooling or attacking other targets. So I wish we'd had Kasada, frankly, instead of IBM, protecting the Australian census in 2016. You may recall that was one of my more disappointing moments in politics. I just filled in the Australian census online and tweeted how easy it was when immediately it crashed. And anyway, it was a pretty prosaic reason that it crashed, but the Kasada could have been very useful at that point. Anyway, I've felt for some time, as I said earlier, that in our traditional focus on prevention, we've paid insufficient attention to detection. In other words, what is actually going on in your network? What has been going on? As opposed to simply building walls, you've got to then be able to patrol to see what's going on inside those walls. And so another company we've invested in is called Cato Security, which provides the first and only cloud-native digital forensics platform for enterprises. Interestingly, again, another former Australian Signals Directorate person, James Campbell, is among the founders. Now, new virtualization technologies such as containerization grow, shrink, and recycle data in a way that makes it almost impossible for security experts to investigate a potential breach. This gives confidence to attackers, knowing they can use this to their advantage, hiding among the complexities of these new auto-scaling technologies. And so what this means is that when a cyber incident occurs in the cloud today, security analysts can spend many days using a patchwork of rudimentary tools manually to collect and process the data needed for an investigation, all the while the hacker's still running around exfiltrating data. And because of the heavy lift and time required to conduct a proper investigation, incidents often get closed without digging deeper than the surface level that's presented in a standard detection platform. So very often decisions on the severity of an incident are made by reviewing just a tiny percentage, say 5% of the data surrounding it. So James Campbell's company, Cato Security, helps analysts look at 100% of the data of a system that's been impacted so they can make fully informed decisions and identify the root cause. Now, Kasada and Cato are just two examples of young Australians starting innovative cybersecurity companies. I mention them not just because I've invested in them, put my money where my mouth is, I guess, but because they provided insight into how vast the cybersecurity challenge is. And this is just at the enterprise level. Now, let's turn to operational technology cybersecurity. And that's of particular interest in your part of the world with so many big, huge industrial enterprises that are that while they may be doing very physical, kinetic things, digging up iron ore, for example, they are increasingly being managed, overseen, controlled in the digital world. Now, you only have to look at the energy sector. Physical infrastructure is becoming increasingly decentralized on the edge and managed digitally rather than through traditional methods. So, if you think about, the electricity business, for example, historically, a small number of generators, big centralized generators, spinning machines, generally powered thermally by, burning coal to make steam, etc. Now you have just an explosion in the number of generators, and I'm not even talking about what's on our rooftops at home, but of all of the wind farms and solar farms and so many. So it's a much more complicated system. The getting to net zero requires a lot of software as well as a lot of windmills and PV modules and so forth. Now, this has created an expanded threat surface, which is vulnerable to new attacker methods. And you recall the German steel plant where there was a cyber attack in 2014, where attackers used phishing emails to steal logins that gave them access to the mill's control systems. In 2018, there was a petrochemical plant in Saudi Arabia, notably attacked with the intention not simply to destroy data or shut down the plant, but to sabotage its operations and trigger an explosion. This is, again, the point I made at the outset. Cyber attacks can steal, they can disrupt, but they can also blow things up. Now, critically, the operators and personnel in those two cases didn't have the visibility and detection at the OT layer to determine that it was actually a cyber attack, and in each case, incorrectly diagnosed it at the outset as a maintenance issue. At the same time, there have been cases where operators and personnel have responded to an incident which they mistakenly assumed to be a cyber attack, but was actually an operational technology issue or just a programming error. So the failure to discern between a cyber attack or a programming error is only becoming more commonplace as automation and operational technology becomes more complex. Now, Dragos is another company in this OT cybersecurity space, or it's a leader, I would say. It was founded by Robert M. Lee, formerly a cyber warfare officer working at the NSA. It's America's equivalent of the ASD or the UK's GCHQ. It's another company we've invested in because of its focus on protecting critical technology and infrastructure from groups that, frankly, without getting, dramatic about it, threaten the foundations of our modern civilization. Always on electricity, clean water, seamless communications. So just as COVID-19 resulted in more individuals working from home, so too has the pandemic accelerated the shift to maintaining operations and infrastructure with more infrequent remote access. We can call this a new pandemic-driven COVID-19 OT cybersecurity gap with dire consequences if we don't address it. Now, when I speak with people in the OT cyberspace, they've observed there is once again a disconnect happening at the chief executive and board level. Chief executives and boards often think because they've made significant investments in preventative controls like patching, firewalls, antivirus and passwords, as dictated by standards and regulations, they believe they're insulated from attack. But the way you protect an enterprise's IT systems is very different from OT. I mean, your adversary, from an operational technology point of view, your adversary may not want to do anything ever, or at least for a very long time. Your adversary may simply want to understand how your system, your enterprise, your company, business, whatever works, understand where the buttons are, where the levers are, so that they can act at some future time. Now, this is why detection is so important. Detection is far too often overlooked, particularly in an environment where nothing is unhackable. So failure to understand this distinction means a failure to provide enterprise security teams with the dedicated resources needed for operational technology, which in turn becomes a lower order priority. Now, the threats in OT are different, and they often involve nation states with political motives. And again, we talk a lot about nation states and criminal groups, but the boundaries between the two are very blurred. There are, particularly in Russia, there are people that work for the Russian state-owned, hacking agencies, if you like, who then, with the, compliance, if you like, of their employers, then freelance with their own criminal operations. It is, and there are countries like North Korea, for example, think of WannaCry, that basically engage in cybercrime. So, the difference between state actor and criminal is very often not especially clear-cut, either in an actual operational sense or in the sense that you've got people working in both, spheres of activity. So, what's to be done? Operational technology cybersecurity has to be an integral part of any digital transformation strategy. And like all good governance, a strategic approach led and endorsed by the highest levels of management is required. Identify which parts of your business are related to operational technology. Take the time to understand all the different scenarios from which cyber attacks can occur. In doing so, you can then understand the costs and time required to counter them and prioritise accordingly. Now, as I found through my life, whether it's in business or politics, transparency is key. A candid, transparent discussion between executives and their team can help to make sure there is the sufficient expertise and resources needed to defend against possible cyber attack. Of course, cybersecurity frameworks and regulations can help provide a common lexicon for many of the actions taken, but every company will have to navigate their own unique journey with no common map or unified approach. We must remember not to defend in isolation, but seek to do so as a collective. Now, companies should be able to band together to identify attacks happening in real time and share that information with governments as well, without giving up data or identity. In the area of OT, for example, the electricity industry in the United States got together and chose Dragos because one of its technologies, Neighborhood Keeper, was able to share everything across the participants at machine speed and with the government, while not sharing any sensitive data and fully protecting the anonymity of the participants. Now, some of you who dealt with me when I was in government, remember I used to talk about us having to take an epidemiological approach to cybersecurity, which is kind of everyone's an epidemiologist nowadays, or everyone on Twitter is anyway. But this is you've got to get a broad picture of what is going on, whether it's in your own network, your own system, or as far as we can, while protecting confidentiality and commercial sensitivities and so forth, seeing what is happening across the economy, because that's when you can see the abnormalities and patterns that are legitimately create concerns. So this collective defence approach is one that's showing a lot of promise. Now, interestingly, this is certainly being picked up by President Biden, who signed an executive order recently to call for the federal government and private sector to partner to confront, and I quote, persistent and increasingly sophisticated malicious cyber campaigns that threaten American security. And that comes after his 100-day effort, which began in April, to improve the cybersecurity of electricity utilities, industrial control systems, which will now also include natural gas, water supply, and chemical pipelines. And of course, this has been brought into high relief by the Colonial Pipeline hack. So what about the bigger picture? Cybersecurity is not simply a national challenge, it's one that transcends borders. And critically, it's one that has the potential to strike at the very heart of our society and the values we hold dear: liberal democracy and freedom. Now, you only have to look at the United States as an example. In the months leading up to the 2016 presidential elections, WikiLeaks published 58,000 emails and messages hacked from the computer of John Podesta, the chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaigns. The US intelligence community concluded Russia was behind the email theft aimed at destabilising Clinton's campaign against Trump. And you could make a very powerful case to say that that hack resulted in Trump becoming president of the United States. So that's a pretty consequential outcome. Now, this revealed a very insidious intention, the desire to undermine faith and confidence in democracy. We've seen similar attacks in the UK, France, Germany, and many other countries. In fact, 41 elections and 7 referendums have been targeted by cyber-enabled operations in the last decade, with Russia the most prolific state actor, followed by China. Iran and North Korea have also been active, with all 4 countries seeking to interfere in the 2020 US election. Now, attacks of this nature typically fall into 2 vectors: denial of service first, and phishing attacks, as we saw in the Clinton campaign, which aimed to disrupt online and electronic voting systems. Second, and perhaps more dangerously, the use of disinformation and misinformation to exploit and manipulate election campaigns and messaging. Now, during the 2020 US election, more than 15,000 Twitter accounts identified as robots used the I voted hashtag on election day. And in almost every US state, more than 1/5 of those posting about the elections on Twitter in the weeks before election day were robots, which gets you back to what Sam Crowther is doing at Casada. Imagine if bots were not able to post on social media accounts, and that's clearly that's something that should be an objective. Now, cyber attacks and disruption give people who are already skeptical about democracy and elections another reason to believe the system isn't working for us. And what's more, simple attacks on vulnerable targets can be carried out by anyone with basic technical knowledge. And disinformation can be created and spread by anyone with a social media account, including the United States president until he got booted off Twitter. Analysis of Trump's 10 most popular tweets during his time in office showed that 4 contained false claims related to the 2020 election results. Of his 100 most popular posts, 36 contained election-related falsehoods, and these 36 posts were collectively liked by 22.6 million followers and received 3.9 million retweets, which speaks to the amplification of misinformation. Now, the threat of cyber attack and interference in elections and referendums isn't going to go away. Do we go back to, tallying votes purely by hand, as in fact the Netherlands has done? They've walked back from electronic voting. I think that's regrettable. I think that it's inevitable as we become more and more connected, the impact of cyber attacks is going to be international. And so we have to have clear and acceptable norms of behaviour for states in cyberspace that promote international peace and security. And that's, of course, why I set up a cyber ambassador in, as I said, currently Tobias Feakin. The UN group of governmental experts in 2015 set out 11 norms which should be complied with in terms of cyber activity. And when I was PM, we reached agreement, in fact, with China on the happy days when we were still speaking, where our 2 countries agreed to act in accordance with those norms, as well as establish a mechanism to discuss cybersecurity and cybercrime issues. Importantly, the statement also agreed that neither country would conduct or support cyber-enabled theft of intellectual property, trade secrets, or confidential business information with the intent of obtaining competitive advantage. Now, you can sort of roll your eyes a bit at a statement like that and wonder whether the parties would comply with it, but it's much better to be having this discussion and at least reaching agreement on that than leaving it all in an area of, sort of a kind of diplomatic dark web where we don't go. We have to cooperate. Now, in conclusion, tech is neither good or bad, right? I mean, a skilled carpenter can build a hospital for children or a gallows. Tech can be put to good or bad uses. The same tech that was proclaimed as ushering in a new age of freedom and individuality can and is used as a tool of oppression and abuse. So what it all comes down to ultimately is people. Now, here in Australia, the rule of law prevails, which defends our freedom and our democracy. We are the most successful multicultural society in the world, and that's built on a foundation of mutual respect. But we can't take it for granted. So I want to thank you here at the WA AUST Cyber Innovation Hub, because it's people like you who are helping to defend our nation's people, their livelihoods, our economy, and the foundations on which our free society rests: water, energy, communications. In this time of change, unprecedented in scale and pace, you more than most have the power and ability to design technology that upholds and defends our values. So now is not the time to be cautious with your ambition. Our democracy, our freedom, our future depends on it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Turnbull. A really insightful presentation, and one that, I'm sure will raise quite a few questions from the audience. So We'll throw now to some questions that I believe have already been prepared or put forward. So Simon's got the mic up the back. Yep, so just raise your hand if you've already told Simon. Thank you very much.
Mr. Turnbull, Tanya Finney from Redhead Communications. I have a bit of a broader question that is less cyber related, but you yourself have said that Australia's diversity is one of its biggest assets. And we had a great panel yesterday about women in cyber. And the business case for inclusion has already been made, but behaviour often filters down from the top. And I wonder what, in your opinion, you think our government could do to increase diversity and inclusion?
Well, I mean, are we just taught you sort of mainly focused on tech and cyber in this question? Because there is a particular problem that we have far too few women working in cyber tech, information technology, too few doing computer science, electrical engineering degrees. It's a real market failure. Now, we did address. I mean, I didn't fix this. Obviously, it's taken a long time to fix it, but we certainly sought to address it in government in the National Innovation and Science Agenda, with both programs to encourage women and girls, schoolgirls, to do quantitative subjects, to stick with maths to, year 12 and so forth, and encourage more women in tech. I mean, I completely agree with you. It's a problem. As a matter of fact, I remember Sheryl Sanders, Sheryl Sandberg, I should say, a distinguished woman in tech, saying that to me once that the percentage of young women doing computer science as a percentage of the total class is less now than it was a generation ago. Julie Inman Grant, I don't know whether Julie's spoken at this conference, who's the e-safety commissioner succeeding Alistair. She's got some very good insights into this, but the more we can do about it, the better. But it is a problem, big problem. Thank heavens for Mel and Canva, I guess.
Thank you.
We probably have time for one more question, Mr. Turnbull.
Sure.
Thanks, Mr. Turnbull. My name is Cecily Rollinson, and I'm the incoming director of the WA AustCyber Innovation Hub. So it's an honour to have you speak at this first inaugural CyberWest Summit. There seem to be so many competing priorities and strategic reasons to be thinking about cybersecurity. As incoming director, what are your priorities for me? Please tell me.
Well, I'm sure I'd like to hear what your priorities are. You tell me what your priorities are and I'll critique them.
Well, my first day on the job is the 5th of July. So from my perspective, building on the great work that Ian and Simon and the team have done, I think deepening the sense of community that we have in the room today, it's really great to see how strong the WA ecosystem is. And perhaps thinking about, research and that education, that pipeline, bringing diverse voices into the industry. But yeah, looking to learn and looking to learn from experts in the field.
Well, I think they're all great priorities. The issue that, we discussed a moment ago about diversity is very important. I think that, there are so many smart people in tech in WA. I mean, it's obviously a lot of working in the resources sector, because a lot of people are working in the resources sector. But, I remember back in the 90s, I was so impressed by the depth of technical talent, and just creative thinking in Western Australia. I've always had this great affection for Perth because, in those days, the the press, who often had mixed views, to say, actually they haven't been quite unmixed generally, mostly negative, but they used to sort of describe me as a buccaneer or a ruthless investment banker and deal maker in those days, which of course was regarded in Perth as a compliment. So that was always, I always felt at home. But but I was always impressed by the engineering talent there. I mean, there's this is not a cybersecurity company, but another company some of you would be familiar with is Advanced Navigation. And the two young guys that started that, Chris Shaw and Xavier Orr, are both engineering graduates from the University of Western Australia. I mean, they've literally produced the best virtualized gyroscopes, I should say, that use sensors to deliver sort of wireless-free autonomous positioning, navigation, and timing. So as long as they know the device knows where it starts, it can work out itself where it is without any GPS or anything like that. I mean, and this is literally world's best tech, and that has been just yet another example of the brilliance that can be found in Western Australia. So I reckon I think the one thing we've worked out with COVID is we've said for years, technology's annihilated geography. I can't tell you how often I've said that. Except for it's annihilated longitudinal distance, I should say, but not latitudinal distance because of time zones and our own body clock. But Perth, brilliant, great schools, great universities, smart people, and you are in a much more friendly time zone than the East Coast, to be quite frank. So I think I think your tech sector, and with the encouragement of WA AusCyber, I think can just go from strength to strength. And I wish you all the best. And I hope to see a few opportunities there. I'd like to win the Emerging Software Exporter of the Year award again. It's about time. Haven't won that for 26 years.
Thank you. Do we have any last questions? Just looking for Simon. Oh, at the back, yes. We'll just get a microphone down there. We'll make this the last one, I think.
Thank you. Bex Neiter here from Paraflare. I guess being in the cybersecurity industry, noticed a huge asymmetry between, our adversaries and our defenders. And this is from both an information perspective and a financial perspective. How long do you think it will take for us to tip that scale? And what do we need to do?
For a start, who is us?
Well, I guess industry, government, the legitimate side of, technology users.
No, I get it. Look, okay, look. Cyber criminals have to be treated. You've got to think of them in a similar way that we think about terrorism. Now, I don't want to sort of take the analogy any further than that. Just let me explain what I mean. If you are in counter-terrorism, you have to be successful, effective, 100% of the time. If you are a terrorist, you only have to be successful once. So the defender is always playing a harder game. Whether you are defending hard physical assets or individuals, close personal protection in a very gritty sense, or whether you're defending networks. And so I think one of the things that we have I think we're only starting to get our head around, we being the community, the intelligence community, defence community, etc., is that cyber criminals have the ability to do as much damage to national security as people with bombs. You know, I mean, if you can shut down the energy system, you know, I made this point in my speech, if you can shut down the energy system, you are having the same effect as somebody blowing up the main generator, you know, maybe even more if you can shut down the whole, the whole network. So there's you've got to start looking at it in I think a more, from a more strategic point of view. And you've got to say to yourself, we should go after the individuals involved in cyber hacking. You know, I mean, terrorists very often, not always, but terrorists are more often than not motivated by religious or political views. I mean, that's actually the dictionary definition, but there are a lot of terrorists who really are just criminals out to make money. But anyway, your typical hacker who is trying to extract ransomware is not really interested in dying for his beliefs or spending the rest of his lifetime in jail. Okay, it's kind of not worth it. So you've got to go after the individuals and be more aggressive in doing that. You've got to go after their cryptocurrencies. I mean, crypto, as you know, enables so much of this criminal activity, and we've got to be able to go after that. So, I think again, this is one of the things. I'm not saying I instigated this by any means, but I certainly was the first PM to be upfront and open about it. Our offensive cyber capabilities have got to be ones that we're prepared to pursue more aggressively, because if we can ensure, for example, that cyber criminals can't profit from their crimes, if we can assure, and the Americans have done this successfully, by the way, with a number of Russian hackers who, having made lots of ill-gotten gains in Russia, then wanted to go and spend some of them in, sunnier locations, and unfortunately for them, found themselves arrested and extradited back to the US. So I think we've got to recognise that this is very, very serious stuff. There's been a tendency for people who've grown up in a security defence environment where the threat was always kinetic, i.e. it was, a bomb or a bullet or something like that, to failure to recognise that cyber can be just as deadly and effective, if not more so, than something that is kinetic. So again, on the defence side, yes, you're right, it's asymmetry. We have to be right all the time. The bad guys only have to be right once. But equally, we can play offence more effectively or more aggressively than we have to date.
Well, Mr. Turnbull, thank you so much for your really insightful keynote for Cyber West Summit 21. You've shared some really innovative and creative ways that we can consider responses to cyber threats and the importance of being agile in our responses. Could I please ask everyone to join me once again in thanking the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull, AC.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Turnbull. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Well, we're coming to the end of Cyber West.